The story begins with a young man named Haruto heading somewhere while his childhood friend Miharu cries and begs him not to go. It is revealed that this is a memory of Haruto, which he relives while on a bus. Suddenly, a train collides with the bus, and Haruto is tragically killed along with the other passengers. Upon waking up in a dark room, Haruto opens his eyes and finds himself in the body of a young, malnourished boy. He is bewildered as his memories are confusing, and he doesn't know if he is still Haruto, the young man from Japan, or if he is the miserable boy. While still pondering whether he has a fever and if that is affecting his mind, a group of men enters the room. The men come in with food and call him by the name Ryo. They start eating but don't offer anything to the starving Ryo. To make matters worse, they complain that he smells bad and that the odor is ruining the taste of their food. After ordering him to go take a bath, the starving Ryo is more concerned with finding food, so he searches for some wild berries in the bushes to eat. While searching in the bushes, Haruto's memories flash through his mind, and he remembers being a 20-year-old student from Japan. Despite the flashbacks, Haruto forces himself to set those memories aside because now he is Ryo, a poor boy living in the alleys of the Bertram Kingdom. Now accepting that he is Ryo, he decides to focus on his mission to avenge his mother, who was murdered by an unknown man. He remembers living with his mother in a small house and how she said they were immigrants from a land where everyone had dark hair. Ryo is pulled from his thoughts when 4 people in white robes approach him to ask if he has seen a girl with purple hair. Initially, he feels intimidated by them. But then the white-haired girl among them introduces herself as Celia and asks him the questions more politely. Ryo replies that he hasn't seen the girl. And then Celia casts a spell to detect magic users nearby, which makes her realize that Ryo has a large amount of magical power. Although they cannot find the girl, Celia gives Ryo a pouch of coins as a token of gratitude for his help before leaving. After hiding the coin pouch in his clothes, Ryo returns to the house where he woke up but is immediately attacked by a masked man. Fortunately, the attacker's knife hits the coin pouch, and Ryo remains unharmed. The man prepares to continue his attack, but suddenly time stops, and the ethereal projection of a girl with pink hair appears before him. She teaches Ryo how to use his magical abilities, and as time resumes, he begins to emit a magical aura and combines Haruto's martial arts memories with his new powers. Using the knowledge the pink-haired girl gave him, he casts a spell to enhance his physical abilities and knocks out the masked man. After defeating the man, he hears noises coming from a bag in the room and finds a girl with purple hair inside it. She asks him to take her to the royal castle but faints upon seeing the battered man beside him. Ryo decides to take her to the castle but is spotted by the robed people who came from the castle. They assume he is one of the kidnappers and take him to the castle for interrogation. Meanwhile, back at the house where Ryo was attacked, the royal guards inspect the place and find the masked man who has regained consciousness. But before they can interrogate him, a mysterious hooded man observing from afar crushes a red crystal, causing the suspect to die foaming at the mouth. The scene shifts, and in the dungeon beneath the castle, Ryo is severely tortured by Charles, the vice captain of the knights. Charles wants Ryo to admit that he is one of the princess's kidnappers, but Ryo insists he is innocent. A while later, the girl with purple hair is revealed to be Princess Flora, who wakes up in her room. Celia and a pink-haired woman named Vanessa, who was caring for her, explain what happened while she was unconscious, and Princess Flora immediately asks to see Ryo, so they take her to the dungeon. Upon entering the dungeon, Celia and Vanessa are horrified to see what Charles had done to the young Ryo. Flora then explains that he is innocent and that he was the one who saved her from the kidnappers. She runs to Ryo after asking Charles to release him. Using her special magical abilities, Celia heals Ryo's wounds, and he passes out. Later, Ryo wakes up in one of the palace rooms, and Celia apologizes to him for what the royal guards did. She also tells him that the king would like to thank him for saving Princess Flora. In the royal throne room, the king is seated with the queen and their 2 daughters, Princess Flora and Christina. A while later, Ryo is brought before them, with a new haircut and fine clothes, after having taken a bath. The king then thanks him for saving Princess Flora and decides to show his gratitude by allowing him to attend the Royal Academy of Bertram, and Ryo accepts the offer and is enrolled in the primary school. However, when Celia, who is a teacher at the school, introduces him to the other students in his class, Ryo immediately feels out of place as the nobles mock him for being a commoner. After school, Ryo visits Celia in her research lab and asks her to teach him how to read and write. Celia then reveals that she is only 12 years old, but skipped all grades to graduate because she is extremely brilliant. While teaching him, Celia notices that he gets all the task answers correct, and she comments that Princess Christina is the only other person in the class who managed that. After the lesson, Celia gives him some children's books to read to improve his skills. Later, Ryo's class participates in combat and fencing lessons. The students use wooden swords to duel each other, and Ryo uses the martial arts knowledge he gained as Haruto in his past life to stand out in the tests, impressing the instructor. After seeing his excellent display of swordsmanship, the instructor offers him a chance to join the Royal Knights, but he politely declines. One day, Ryo begins to recall memories from Haruto's life and even remembers his childhood friend, Miharu. He becomes angry at himself for holding on to Haruto's problems and decides to focus on his new life and move forward. A time skip occurs, and 5 years later, Ryo is chosen to represent the Royal Academy of Bertram in a tournament against the Royal Guards. However, another student named Alphonse is unhappy with the selection and claims that Ryo should not have gotten the spot because he is a commoner. At school, Ryo helps Celia in the library, and she praises him for his tremendous progress since enrolling at the academy 5 years ago. And he responds by teasing her about how she hasn't grown since they met. Later, the two have tea, and Ryo reveals that he wishes to attend school with Celia and that he also wants to travel to his parents' homeland in the Yagumo region after graduation, especially because of how poorly he is treated by the other students. Sometime later, the exhibition tournament between the Royal Academy of Bertram and the Royal Guards begins. Alfred, the referee, starts the first match, which is between Ryo and Charles, the vice captain of the guards who tortured him 5 years ago. Charles tries to intimidate Ryo by mocking him, but Ryo remains unfazed and prepares for his revenge. The duel begins, and the two fight intensely, clashing their wooden swords and using all their skills. Ryo counters all of Charles's attacks, causing him to fight in anger. He charges at Ryo with everything he has, desperate to win. But Ryo gains the upper hand and disarms Charles, defeating him. Charles reluctantly accepts defeat and leaves disappointed. Later that night, Charles turns to a mysterious blue-haired man while drinking together. The guest is the ambassador from the Proxia Empire, and when Charles tells him that Ryo was involved when Flora was kidnapped 5 years ago, the guest becomes interested. It is then revealed that the man is the hooded figure who killed the masked assailant. One day, in class, Celia teaches the class about magic and asks them to cast a spell to create a sphere of light. While trying, the other noble students mock Ryo for failing, even though everyone else has already mastered the technique. For some reason, Ryo cannot use the same type of magic as they can, but he possesses a special type of magic different from theirs. Ryo does not fully understand his abilities and hides them from everyone to avoid drawing unnecessary attention. After class, Ryo is accused of seducing the female students by another noble student named Stuart. However, Celia immediately intervenes and begins to defend Ryo, so Stuart leaves him alone but warns him not to anger him, as he is from the powerful house of Huguenots. Later, the students go out for a practical lesson, where they must work as a team to achieve a goal by passing through mountainous forests. Alphonse is the team leader and leads the group through the forest. He makes Ryo carry the team members' bags, claiming that since Ryo has no magic, he would not be useful in fighting monsters. But it's obvious that he just dislikes Ryo. Even so, Ryo accepts the task, and the group begins their journey. Along the way, they encounter a horde of goblins. The boys enhance their physical abilities with magic to fight the goblins. After a brief battle, the group emerges victorious, so they continue on their path. But somewhere in the shadows, the Proxia Ambassador watches Ryo and intends to test the young boy's abilities. He has developed an interest in Ryo and believes that he possesses a special type of magic called spirit magic. Soon, the group reaches the end of the path, and the students find themselves at the edge of a cliff. Suddenly, they are ambushed by huge spear-wielding orcs. When Stuart is injured by one of the spears, he stumbles and accidentally pushes Flora off the cliff. Fortunately, Ryo notices in time and jumps to save her, grabbing her and pushing her back to the cliff. But he falls. Back on the cliff, Alphonse leads the team, and they manage to defeat the orcs. Later, the students accuse Stuart of pushing Flora, but he lies, claiming that Ryo pushed him. Flora immediately defends Ryo, but the other students believe Stuart. Suddenly, they are attacked by a giant minotaur, and realizing they cannot defeat it, most of them flee, but Flora stays behind to heal the injured students. While she does so, the minotaur tries to attack her, but Ryo returns and cuts off the creature's arm. He tells Flora to run with the others before resuming the battle. Eventually, he defeats the monster by decapitating it but flees before the other students can see him, as everyone believes he pushed Flora off the cliff. Days after the forest incident, Ryo is missing and presumed lost. At school, Celia overhears Duke Huguenot, Stuart's father, planning to publicly announce that Ryo pushed Princess Flora off the cliff, even though he knows it was Stuart who did it. Later, Ryo discreetly visits Celia in her lab, and she is relieved to see him well. She tells him about the Duke's plot and becomes furious, but Ryo doesn't care and says no one would believe him. To protect himself from further trouble, he decides to travel to the Yagumo region, where his ancestors lived, and promises Celia that they will meet again. He then departs, leaving Celia heartbroken as it seems she has fallen in love with him. After traveling for 3 days, Rio arrives in the kingdom of Galark. He reaches a trading town and decides to buy food, unaware that someone is following him. Rio leaves the town after finishing his shopping for food and spices to continue his journey through the forest. Somewhere in the forest, he finds a beast girl who appears unconscious. He approaches her, but she suddenly wakes up and spits a poisonous thorn at him. Rio kicks her away, and his vision begins to blur from the venom, but he notices she has animal ears. So he concludes she is a beast girl and uses his magic to neutralize the poison. Seeing this, the girl declares that she will kill him and begins attacking him with her knives, but he manages to pin her to the ground. As she struggles, Rio calms her with a spell that makes her fall asleep. Rio notices she has a submission collar around her neck, so he uses a magic spell he learned from a book to remove it. In a flashback, it is revealed that the beast girl's name is Latifa, and she died in the same train accident as Haruto. She was transported to the same fantasy world but reincarnated as a beast girl and was later captured by the Huguenot family. She was imprisoned in a dungeon where Stuart treated her cruelly every day. Latifa soon wakes up, and Rio tells her he removed the submission collar, which makes her thank him with tears of joy. She explains that she knows nothing about her master except Stuart's name. Rio immediately concludes that it is the same Stuart from the Royal Academy, and that Latifa was sent to kill him by House Huguenot. After Latifa tells him she will not try to kill him again, he frees her from her restraints, but she asks to follow him on his journey since he is also heading east, which leads to a place called Wilderness, where beasts and demi-humans live in peace. Rio agrees, and the two continue their journey, during which they face dangerous adventures. One night, Latifa starts talking in her sleep about her parents in Tokyo, and after hearing her, Rio realizes she died in the same accident as him, but decides not to say anything about it. A few nights later, Latifa has nightmares, so Rio calms her with a magic spell, and notices that their campfire has suddenly gone out. Going out to investigate, he sees a large wolf that vanishes in a blinding ray of light. He then uses his magic to detect 3 demi-humans around the cabin. 2 of them find Latifa sleeping and discover she was put to sleep using spirit magic. As a result, they conclude he kidnapped her. So one of them, named Yuzuma, attacks him with a powerful magic spell, knocking him unconscious. Rio wakes up later and finds himself tied to a bed by the demi-humans. Suddenly, Latifa wakes up and runs to check if Rio is okay, realizing what has happened. Realizing their mistake, the demi-human girls apologize to Rio for capturing him and remove his restraints. An elderly lady among them, named Ursula, also apologizes and tells him he can stay in the room to recover. The next morning, Rio wakes up in the village where the demi-humans took him, and their leader, Ursula, shows him around. She takes him to an enormous tree called the Guardian Tree, where Dryas, the spirit of powerful trees, resides. Then she leads him to a conference room where he meets a dwarf named Dominic and an elf named Sildora waiting for him. During the meeting, the elders apologize for the previous misunderstanding and thank him for saving Latifa from slavery. As a sign of gratitude, they ask what he would like in return. So Rio asks to stay in the village and also learn about the spiritual arts and village traditions. They gladly accept his requests, and suddenly a green-haired girl appears, levitating. Rio discovers she is Dryas, the spirit of the Guardian Tree. Dryas senses a spirit within Rio and assumes he has made a contract with it. However, Rio does not remember anything about this. But then Dryas touches his face and confirms that he has an insane amount of magical energy within him. She then tells him that he has so much power because there is a dormant spirit inside him. Later, Orphea takes Rio to a house where Latifa and the other demi-human girls await him, and they all have dinner together. And after all that, it is decided that the girls will live with Rio and Latifa to remove any suspicion from the villagers. Elsewhere, the proxy ambassador, whose name is revealed to be Rice, rides a griffin with a young blonde man to the entrance of a cave. Upon arrival, Rice enters the cave while the young man waits outside. Shortly after, Rice emerges from the cave with a large wyvern egg and hands it to the young man. The two then continue their journey with the egg, riding the griffin. A year has passed since Rio settled in the forest village, and a feast is being prepared for the night of the Great Spirit Festival. While Rio and the villagers enjoy the feast and have fun together, Rice and the young man arrive somewhere in the forest to rest for the night. Rice gives the man a red pill and tells him to swallow it. He states that if he does, it will allow Rice to know where he is at all times. The young man swallows it without hesitation, and Rice then leaves to inspect the area, leaving him to guard the egg. Back in the forest village, Rio takes Latifa for a walk in the forest. During the walk, he tells her that his time in the village is coming to an end. Rio explains that he wishes to continue his journey to his ancestors' homeland soon, which means he will have to leave them. Latifa says she wants to follow him, but he refuses, saying he doesn't know how dangerous the rest of his journey will be and doesn't want to put her in danger. However, Latifah does not accept this and becomes instantly upset as she doesn't want to part from him. Rio tries to calm her, but she just runs away from him, crying. Meanwhile, in the village, the elders call for a meeting because they sense a large swarm of wyverns flying toward them. In the wyvern cave, Rice begins stealing all the remaining eggs and transports them elsewhere. While flying in the air, the demi-humans spot the young blonde man somewhere in the forests and decide to investigate. They approach him to find out what he is doing there, but he becomes intimidated by them and flees on the griffin. As he escapes, the wyverns suddenly start pursuing him, and Sarah realizes they are heading toward the village. Back in the cave, Rice has already transported all the eggs, so he pulls out a red stone similar to the one he made the young man swallow. He crushes the stone, and as soon as he does, the man dies mid-air, coughing blood and falling from the griffin. Still flying, Sarah summons a spirit wolf, and Alma mounts it. Meanwhile, on the ground, Latifah is wandering through the forest, and suddenly, the wyvern egg that the young man dropped hits the ground and cracks open right in front of her. Following the egg, the largest wyvern lands before Latifah, who is now utterly terrified. The enraged beast attempts to kill Latifah with a massive fireball from its mouth, but Alma arrives and saves her. The others are unaware of what is happening, so they rush to her aid. Alma then summons a great spirit lion to join the wolf in attacking the wyvern. Despite their strongest attacks, the lion and wolf cannot defeat the wyvern, so Latifah distracts it, allowing Alma to strike. However, she becomes trapped, and just as the giant beast is about to attack her, Rio appears and saves her. After flying to safety, Rio uses his magic to enhance his powers, and confronts the wyvern with only his fists and feet. The wyvern then tries to unleash a powerful fire attack against Rio, but he counters it by conjuring a large energy ball, which he fires at the wyvern. The wyvern then attacks with a powerful fire blast and hits itself, sliding back. With the largest wyvern defeated, the others retreat, and the demi-humans are impressed with how easily Rio defeated the leader of the pack. The next day, Latifah finally accepts that Rio is leaving, so she reveals that she was once human in Japan but died and reincarnated in this fantasy world. Rio already knew this but simply tells her that he, too, was reincarnated into this realm. Sometime later, Rio bids farewell to the elders and the villagers. As a parting gift, Dominic gives him a mithril sword to channel his spirit magic and a black wyvern leather armor. The elves give him potions and medicines, while the beast folk provide food and supplies. Finally, Sildora gives him a magical storage device he can use to store all his gifts during his travels. Rio thanks everyone and promises to return to save them if they ever need his help before giving an emotional goodbye to Latifah and departing. 2 weeks after arriving in the Yagumo region, Rio still has not found any information about his parents. Sometime later, he arrives at the village of Karasuki, where he is directed to the village chief, an elderly woman named Yuba. When he secures an audience with the village chief, he asks about his father, Zen, and his mother, Ayame. The moment he mentions the names, Yuba recognizes them and reveals some shocking information to him. It turns out that Yuba is Ryo's grandmother, Zen's mother, and she proves it to him when she takes him to the graves built for his parents. Rio kneels before the graves to pay his respects, and Yuba tells him that his parents had to leave the village many years ago for a reason she cannot yet reveal. She then asks him to stay with her in the village until she is ready to tell him, and Rio agrees to the terms. At Yuba's house, Rio discovers that she lives with a girl named Ruri, who happens to be his cousin. The next day, Rio settles in and begins helping with household chores. In the process, he learns that both Yuba and Ruri can use spirit magic, just like him. Later in the afternoon, Ruri's friend, Sayo, and her brother, Shin, come over for lunch. Afterward, Shin takes Rio hunting in a forest where they assist a hunter named Dola. Despite multiple attempts, Shin does not make a single catch. But Rio proves to be a prodigy in hunting as he excels on his first try. Naturally, Shin becomes jealous when he realizes this. As time passes, Rio becomes more familiar with the villagers and helps with various tasks. Before long, he becomes very popular and well-liked by the people of Karasuki. One day, Yuba calls him and asks for a favor. She asks him to escort merchants traveling to the royal capital to sell rice. Rio agrees, but suddenly his attention is drawn to a heated argument between Shin and an arrogant man named Gon. Gon is the son of the leader of a nearby village and demands to stay at Yuba's house while his cart, used for transporting goods to the capital, is being repaired. In the heat of the argument, Gon declares that one day he will marry Ruri because she is Yuba's only heir. This declaration makes Shin lose his temper and attack Gon. He punches Gon, but, unfortunately, his efforts are in vain as he is quickly overpowered by the larger man. Gon grabs Shin by the neck, choking him. However, before Gon can cause serious harm to Shin, Yuba arrives and stops the one-sided fight. The elderly leader decides to overlook the incident, assuming it was a misunderstanding, and allows Gon to stay in a guest house until his cart is repaired. To keep her safe from Gon, Yuba allows Sayo to stay at her house. Later that night, Ryo meets with Ruri and gives her a red stone. He tells her it is a protective amulet and asks her to keep it in a corner of her room. Elsewhere, at the guest house, Gon meets with his lazy friends while drinking. They talk, revealing that the cart was not damaged by accident. They had deliberately damaged the cart as an excuse to remain in the village of Karasuki while plotting a sinister plan. The next day, a man arrives on horseback. The man appears to be very kind and interesting, introducing himself as a tax inspector named Hayate. Along with two of his assistants, Hayate inspects the villagers' crops and then is welcomed by Yuba to her house, where he dines. Later that night, Gon sneaks into Ruri and Sayo's room. While the girls sleep, he tries to execute his vile plan but stops when he sees Ryo entering the room. Ryo had sensed his presence in the building thanks to the protective amulet he gave Ruri earlier. Without hesitation, Ryo grabs Gon and gives him a serious beating, not just because he invaded the girls' room. Unfortunately for Gon, he also reminds Ryo of the man who killed his mother, fueling his motivation to beat him mercilessly. Ryo strikes Gon so hard that he almost kills him, but Hayate arrives just in time to stop him, using his magic to heal Gon's severe injuries. Hayate assures Ryo that he will take the intruder to a prison camp the next day. After this, Ryo leaves to spend some time alone, and while lost in thought, he realizes how much he had forgotten about his mission to avenge his mother. He reflects on how his life has drastically changed since Haruto's memories and personality merged with his own, and how he could have killed Gon, but Haruto suppressed his darker thoughts. The next day, Ryo apologizes to everyone for his violent behavior the night before, but instead of being reprimanded, everyone thanks him for saving the girls, who were in a very vulnerable position. As promised, after saying goodbye, Hayate takes Gon and his accomplices and places them in the back of a cart to be transported to the prison camp. Before Hayate departs, Yuba calls him over to hand him a letter for her father, Lord Gouki. At the same time, Shin, Dola, Sayo, and Ryo set off on their journey to the royal capital to sell their rice. After traveling for a few days, they reach the royal capital and find a place to stay for a while. While the others stay behind, Dola takes Shin and Ryo to a restaurant for drinks. After a few rounds, they leave the place, and Shin personally thanks Ryo for saving his sister from Gon the other night. Soon after, Ryo decides to take Sayo to the market and offers to buy her a gift as thanks for taking care of him since they met. When they arrive at the market, Sayo picks out a hair ornament and Ryo buys it for her. This makes Sayo realize she may have developed strong feelings for Ryo, wondering if she is in love with him. Elsewhere, Hayate arrives at the large house and hands over the letter Yuba gave him before leaving the village to his father, Lord Gouki. A wave of surprise washes over Gouki as he reads the letter. Sometime later, Gouki meets Ryo and invites him to his home. It turns out that Gouki and his wife, Keoko, once served as assistants to Ryo's mother, Ayame, who was at one point a princess of the royal family of Karasuki. 20 years ago, the kingdom of Karasuki was at war with the kingdom of Rokuren. As a result, Ryo's father, Zen, who served as a soldier in the Karasuki army, rose through the ranks, leading to a duel with Gouki. The two engaged in an intense duel, and afterward, Gouki couldn't help but admit that Zen was a very skilled fighter. Gouki was so impressed by Zen's swordsmanship and combat skills that he suggested he become a royal guard for the Karasuki family. After joining the royal guard, they met Ayame, marking the beginning of their love story. At that time, the kingdom of Karasuki signed a peace treaty with the kingdom of Rokuren, intended to finally bring peace between the two nations. However, during the peace treaty signing, the prince of the kingdom of Rokuren took an interest in Ayame and ordered his aide to kidnap her. Before the aide could do so, however, Zen arrived in time to knock him down and save Ayame. Unfortunately, Zen not only knocked him down but accidentally killed him with his attack. News quickly spread, and the Prince of Rokuren was so furious that he ordered Zen's immediate execution. He also seized the opportunity to demand Ayame's hand in marriage as the only condition to maintain peace between the two nations. With that, Zen and Ayame fled the kingdom together. As Gouki concludes the story he was telling Ryo, he invites him to meet his grandparents, the current king and queen of the kingdom of Karasuki. The next day, Ryo goes to the royal palace and presents himself to King Homura and Queen Shizuki. Still a bit surprised that they are his grandparents, he then tells them the story of how Ayame was brutally murdered by a red-haired man named Lucius. Ryo recalls that Lucius was an adventurer who worked closely with his father, Zen. He remembers his childhood and how Lucius helped them a lot after his father's death, but suddenly attacked one day and forced him to drink a strange potion. Ayame saw what was happening and intervened to save Ryo, but ended up being killed by Lucius, who kept a sinister expression on his face the entire time. After that incident, Ryo's life changed forever as he found himself in the alleys, where he lived a horrible life until the day he met Princess Flora. Ending his story, Ryo vows to one day avenge his mother, and the king supports him. To prepare Ryo for his mission, his grandfather decides to first test his strength. The test will be a fight against Gouki, the strongest warrior in Karasuki. With the king and queen seated, the fight between them begins in the courtyard. The two engage in an intense duel, appearing evenly matched at first. However, Gouki decides to take it to the next level. He gets serious and envelops his sword with magical energy, delivering a powerful blow to Ryo. At this point, it seems to be the end for the young man. But he manages to counter with an ingenious water spell and places his sword at Gouki's neck, winning the fight. After this brilliant display, King Homura is impressed and immediately concludes that Ryo doesn't need any more training. Later that night, Ryo returns to the small village, and upon arriving at Yuba's house, he tells Ruri that they are cousins and that he is a prince of the Karasuki kingdom. Ryo then reveals that he plans to leave the village in a year because he wants to return to the land where he grew up. But in the meantime, he would like to spend more time with them and the villagers. As time passes, Ryo continues to help the villagers with farming, hunting, and anything he can be useful in. One day, while planting rice on the farm, Ryo tells Sayo that he will soon set out on a journey. Once again, Ryo breaks another heart, as Sayo immediately begins to cry and tries to hide it until Ruri interrupts them, preventing Ryo from noticing the tears. Over the next 6 months, Sayo practices her spirit arts daily, and when she feels confident enough, she takes Ryo to the forest for a private conversation. She confesses her love for him, but Ryo tells her they cannot be together because he will soon have to leave the village. Desperate to stay with him, Sayo reveals that she has been practicing her spirit arts and claims that she is strong enough to accompany him on his journey. However, Ryo does not waver in his decision and apologizes before leaving her more heartbroken than the first time. Sometime later, Ryo is finally ready to leave the village. He bids farewell to Yuba and the villagers before setting off to continue his journey alone. As he leaves, Sayo waits for him at the village's exit and finally accepts that he is going away. They both say goodbye and promise to meet again someday. On his way, Ryo stops by the forest village. There, he reunites with Latifa and the other demi-humans. After receiving a warm welcome, Ryo decides to stay in the village for a few months, much to everyone's joy. He comes up with the idea of building a house that he can take with him, storing it in his space-time storage device. Dominic likes the idea and offers to build the house for him. One day, Ryo wakes up to find a strange, pink-haired girl lying naked beside him in bed. Ryo is startled, but the mysterious girl reveals that she is a spirit who made a contract with him, although she doesn't remember how. Worse, she doesn't know how they were separated and can't recall her name either. She tells him that all she knows is that she exists for him and calls him Haruto while communicating telepathically. After promising not to reveal anything about his past life, she asks Ryo to give her a name, since she can't remember her own. The spirit girl finally creates a dress for herself using spirit magic. And as Ryo sees her, he begins to recall Miharu, his childhood friend when he was Haruto. Suddenly, Ryo suggests the name Aishia, which means beautiful spring in the beast folks language. She accepts the name, and Ryo calls her Aishia, the tree spirit. However, has no idea why Aishia lost her memories. Aishia reveals that she excels in all elements of spirit magic, which is extremely rare. To understand just how powerful Aishia really is, Ryo decides to spar with her. During the fight, Ryo uses all his magical abilities and attacks, but in the end, they appear evenly matched as Aishia counters each of Ryo's moves, mirroring his combat techniques. After the fight, Dryas decides to teach Aishia everything about spirits. Days pass, and Aishia becomes accustomed to life in the forest village. When Dominic finally finishes building Ryo's house, he reveals that Ryo will be leaving the village in 2 days. Once again, before he leaves, the elders give him gifts. This time, Ursula presents him with a teleportation device so he can return to the village whenever he wishes. Sildura gives him earrings that he can use to change his hair color and disguise himself. After saying goodbye to everyone, Ryo departs with Aishia. Before returning to the land where he grew up, Ryo takes a detour and decides to visit Celia in the kingdom of Bertram. Arriving in the capital of the kingdom, Ryo changes his hair color so that no one will recognize him. Now, keeping a low profile with his disguise, he and Aishia visit a bakery. Inside the bakery, Ryo and Aishia overhear some people talking and learn about the wedding parade of a nobleman that will take place the next day. Later that night, Ryo and Aishia go to the Royal Academy where Celia teaches and stealthily enter the building. Inside, they manage to sneak past the guards unseen and reach Celia's lab. However, Ryo is shocked to see the room empty, unlike when he last saw it. Desperate for answers, Ryo and Aishia leave the lab, and when they encounter some other teachers, Aishia uses her spirit magic to hypnotize one of them. Under the spell, The man reveals that Celia is going to marry Charles, the royal guard. Rio also learns that while he was away, the Kingdom of Beltrum suffered a major defeat at the hands of the Proxia Empire. The hypnotized man continues speaking and reveals that Charles initiated peace negotiations with the Proxia Empire because the royal family of Beltrum lost its power. After the Huguenot family's flight from the capital, House Arbor arranged a political marriage with House Claire as a way to secure more power. Hearing this, Rio assumes that Celia is being forced to marry Charles and decides to see her after leaving the Royal Academy. Meanwhile, in her room, Celia has accepted her fate and is prepared to become Charles's property as soon as they marry. She believes she has no choice and is ready to go through with the marriage if it will protect her and her family. While sipping tea, she looks at a drawer and stares at the letter Rio sent her a long time ago, wishing she could see him one more time, as she still harbors feelings for him. Sneaking through the building, Rio enters Celia's room, and she is shocked to see him after so long. It has been 4 years since she last saw him, and she struggles to maintain her composure. However, Rio is more concerned about something else. He gets straight to the point and asks if she is truly happy with the marriage arrangements to Charles. Although it is quite obvious that she is lying, Celia insists that she is happy with the arrangements and is prepared to go ahead with the wedding. It seems that Rio sees through her facade, sensing that something is off. But before he can press his point, Celia asks him to leave so they won't get caught and create scandalous rumors or, worse, involve him in serious trouble. After Rio leaves the house, Celia locks herself in her room and begins crying desperately. The next day, everyone begins preparing for the wedding, and Charles finally introduces Celia to his 6 other wives. The women mock her and inform her that she will be the lowest ranked among them. When Princess Christina arrives, she asks to speak with Celia privately, pulling her away from the malicious wives. Christina congratulates Celia on her marriage and wishes her well. However, Christina feels guilty for Celia having to marry to maintain local political stability and promises that one day she will do whatever she can to help Celia when the opportunity arises. The scene shifts to the wedding parade, which is about to begin, and a crowd of people gathers to watch. Hidden among the crowd are Aisha and Rio, who are still in disguise. The wedding carriage stops, and Celia is about to step out. As Charles extends his hand for her to take, Celia recalls the conversation she had with Rio the night before. She remembers asking Rio if he was willing to marry her and take her to a distant land where they could be together. Celia is pulled from her thoughts when Charles calls her name, asking her to take his outstretched hand. With a sigh of defeat, she takes his hand, believing she is no more than a puppet and will soon become Charles's property. Suddenly, they hear the guards shouting for someone to stop. And when Celia looks, she realizes it is Rio in disguise, running toward the carriage. The guards attempt to stop him with a human blockade, but he breaks through it effortlessly with a powerful wind attack. Next, the squad of mages tries to contain him, firing photon bullets. But Rio dodges all the attacks and simply jumps over them. Rio finally reaches the carriage, but then Charles's elite squad stands in his way. Celia grows worried, but Charles confidently reassures her, referring to the imminent fight as a show before the ceremony. Charles continues boasting about his elite guards but stops when he sees Rio defeating them effortlessly. Stunned by Rio's skills, Charles can only watch in awe as Rio lands a powerful punch to his stomach, catching him by surprise. Charles falls unconscious from the blow, and Rio grabs Celia, holding a knife to her neck in front of the crowd. The onlookers are outraged, but Rio communicates with Celia telepathically. He tells her it's him and assures her he won't hurt her. Rio explains that this is part of a plan and reveals that he knows she isn't marrying by choice. He then asks again if she truly wants to go through with the wedding. As he holds the knife against her neck, Rio recalls memories of his mother and is determined not to stand by and lose someone important to him, knowing he would regret it for the rest of his life. Initially, Celia hesitates to respond, but Rio reassures her, saying he can end the wedding right away if she wishes and can even take her far away with him. Hearing these words, Celia finally admits her true feelings and confesses that she wants him to stop it and take her away, wasting no time. Rio announces to Charles that he is kidnapping Celia and asks her to cooperate with the plan. He carries her in his arms and begins to flee, but the guards and mages pursue and attack them. As he runs, Rio fights off all the guards. And when he senses the situation becoming critical, he jumps into a dark alley and hands Celia over to Aisha. Celia plans to act as a distraction while the girls escape the royal capital and meet him later at a designated meeting point. After reviewing the plan, the girls depart, and Rio returns to the streets to face the guards. Even though it is an intense battle, Rio fights them all alone, doing his best not to kill anyone. When it becomes clear that he is too powerful for ordinary guards, Alfred, the kingdom's strongest knight, emerges from the crowd wielding a powerful sword. The two heavyweights engage in a fierce battle, and Rio notices that Alfred's sword is imbued with magic. Although Alfred has the upper hand, Ryo still manages to block and dodge all his attacks. Alfred attempts to end the fight quickly by casting a spell on his sword, which he uses to enhance his strike before delivering a devastating blow to Ryo. When the dust settles, Ryo is nowhere to be seen, and Alfred orders his men to search for him. Meanwhile, outside the capital, Ryo meets up with the girls at the designated location, and Celia thanks him for rescuing her. Suddenly, a storm begins to form, and large beams of magical light start descending from the sky to the ground all across the land. Ashia, being the more powerful of the two, is ready to fight. She immediately senses something is wrong and warns Ryo that he needs to help someone in danger. We then see elsewhere that a boy and two girls are lost and kidnapped by bandits, but are rescued by Ryo in a surprising twist. One of the people he saves is Miharu, but she does not recognize him. And with that, the season comes to an end. I hope you enjoyed the story. If you liked it and want to see the continuation, please consider leaving a like and subscribing, as it helps keep the channel alive.